My bad, my bad. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Hip Hop is Therapy, presented by Dr. Claire Speaks and Hip Hop for the Future, SPC. How's it going, Dr. Claire?
It's going. I got my Allegra in. The allergies are at bay right now.
We are hanging in there for the people. Yeah, I just want to say again, thank you so much for rocking out here with me. This is such an important month and such an important topic, maybe a mental health awareness month, and mental health being a very, very serious issue in our communities and just America as a whole, as we spoke about yesterday. Everybody who's tuning in, make sure you check out our live last week that kicked off this 3-part series, and we've got one more coming up next week with Hip Hop is Public Health. Is there anything you want to say to start off before I get into it?
I just wanted to say welcome and thank you so much for giving us the gift of your time. I always say it's the only gift we can't give back. So we really appreciate it. And let's get into it.
All right, word. So for all the folks who didn't check us out last week, I wanted to start off by just making sure we, clear the table and we set off on the same place of what hip hop is. And I think, especially considering all the beef that's going on right now, I even heard somebody say, well, Kendrick Lamar is more hip hop and Drake is more rap, right? And that kind of gets my goat because, hip hop is a culture, right? And I'm going to add this little slide right here that we put up last week. This is one of the slides I use in my presentation because as we see, emceeing right here, emceeing or rap is one little facet of hip hop culture. And shout out to the Zulu Nation and Hip Hop is Green for getting us all the way up to 10 elements of hip hop. On the left side, we see some more of the well-known practices of hip-hop culture, because it is a culture, right? Shared practices, shared schema, vocabulary, different ways that people engage that we share across the world nowadays, since hip-hop is the largest human expressive culture that has ever been created. But we see breaking. A lot of people understand graffiti, DJing, MCing. Some people don't know the beatboxing is one of those practices as well. But moreover, what I think connects the community is that right side, right? The knowledge of self, right? The street language, the fashion, the street hustle, the health and wellness. So I'm not going to dig in too deep because if y'all want a bigger synopsis, I think I broke that down a little bit last week. But, it kind of messes me up when a lot of people say, the positive stuff is actually hip hop while rap is this industry stuff. No, they can't change our words. They can't change our definition. So hip hop is a culture of shared practices, one of which is rap. All right. So now that I laid that groundwork right there, I want to introduce the indomitable Dr. Raphael Travis. First off, I just want to highlight because in my hip hop therapy 101 workshop, I've been talking about this brother before we even got connected, just because the work he's doing is just really amazing. One thing that I've always been trying to do within my work in hip hop is trying to prove that what I'm doing is valid. And a lot of the times it's really hard to even prove that because there's not enough money, not enough research, not enough data. And that's one of the things I really appreciate that this brother is doing right here. So I want to introduce you, Dr. Raphael Travis. How you doing?
Very well. Thank you, brother. Appreciate the time and the opportunity to connect with y'all and really like this initiative as an opportunity to shine a light on this great culture we love.
Awesome. So I guess my first big question for you, man, is how did you even get into this?
So, I guess this as in the culture or this as in kind of seeing the ways that that we can use the culture in these different kind of spaces that we operate in.
I guess we could start from jump, right?
Yeah. So the culture itself, I mean, I was born and raised in New York, born in 73, the year of the supposed birth of the culture. And, it was just the air we breathe. There was no name for it. It was just, whether it was the music and, the way people were putting words together, all aspects of the culture were just things that were in the space that we're a part of. So, we saw people spinning on their heads like, oh, that's dope. I want to know how to do that. So, we got into the B-boy thing. And, I was dope. My name was Treacherous T. I was out there popping and breaking and doing all that stuff. we had block parties where the DJ was on spinning. That was the first time I heard Freedom at a block party. I'm like, yo, this is the greatest thing ever. I always loved graffiti. To me, it's beautiful, creative. Like, I was always too scared to spray paint on the walls, but I would draw on everything. So, I love lettering and all that kind of stuff. So, from the first time you heard, Rapper's Delight or whatever, you had to memorize all the words. My dad was a DJ, pre-hip hop. So there was always music around, turntables, records. And, in terms of, knowledge itself, that was the first place where you began to hear words talking about things that, we saw in our environment. I grew up in the projects, but, in a wealthier community, but, our neighborhood, we had a lot of the struggles that a lot of low income communities have. And so, when you start to hear and see things, that are on the message, it's like, wow, this is a space that's talking about a lot of the challenges we know that, the people that look like us are facing. So there were so many aspects of the culture that spoke to me before there was any name of rap or hip hop or any of that kind of thing. So there was always something personal about it. I could express myself. I could see myself. I could, and then as we got older in Public Enemy and all that kind of stuff, where you really started to challenge that negative narrative about what it was to be a young Black male in the United States, that was really something we could really sink our teeth into. And that's what really started to, get the wheels spinning in terms of the utility of it or the value. It was really from a self-care standpoint, right? It's like, I know that these songs sort of speak to things that either I want to say and can't say, or maybe they kind of give me some wisdom or some jewels or a different way to think about things, or just reinforcing things that, maybe my parents are telling me about, our history and how important, the people that we come from, the contributions that they've made to society, the sacrifices that they've made. So there was a lot that was poured into the culture that wasn't really reflected in other spaces that I could connect to. So really it was a fabric of my life, but, kind of fast forward without giving the whole story, as I got older and, the music changed, I went away to school when the industry sort of took control of an aspect of the culture. So, when I went away to school, that's when, Dre and all that stuff came out, and you started to see kind of a shift in things. But, what I always share is how fortunate I am, and, people in my generation were, is like the formative years of the culture were also the identity forming aspect of my life. You know what I'm saying? So, I had the benefit of having Public Enemy and X-Clan and Poor Righteous Teacher and Brand Nubian and all of that at a time where, I really was kind of solidifying aspects of how I showed up in the world and who I wanted to be. And so when that divergence in the culture happened, a lot of that foundation was already set. You know what I mean? And so, fast forward to when I was a practitioner as a social worker, worked in a residential treatment center, worked in a group home, worked a lot with young people that were in and out of juvenile justice. And, at that time, interesting, one of the biggest artists at the time was DMX. And for a lot of those kids, his story was their story, right? He was in a group home, you know what I mean? He had that difficult home life. And so they connected with a lot of that. And so, at that time I was a lot younger. And so we were listening to the same music at that time, so it was an easy place to begin, a little bit deeper conversations. So whether it was on the basketball, it wasn't systematic at that time, you know. It was,
That's
this is another way to connect with them, just the same way as like if we get on the basketball court, we can have these conversations. So it just became another tool in the toolbox. You know what I'm
That's
saying?
really interesting to me, man, because when I was falling into my teen, trappings, you know what I'm saying, of anger and trying to figure out where to put that and how to deal with it, I was listening to DMX, you know what I'm saying? For better or worse some days, you know what I'm saying? A lot of his narratives helped me, but a lot of his narratives sent me off the deep end just because of interpretation. Fast forward about a decade, I'm working in a level 12 group home here in California with these little homies trying to figure out GarageBand. And that was my entrance into hip hop education. I didn't even know I was a hip hop educator when I'm trying to teach him, and they're asking me why I rap so positive and stuff. So that really, really resonates with me right there.
Yeah, you have these tools that you didn't even know that you could really use to connect, and it opens a lot of doors, a lot of educational, therapeutic discussions, whichever way you want to go with it. Yeah. So that was kind of my informal introduction into using this work. And kind of skip ahead a little bit. Another thing that was going on for me at that time was realizing that not everybody, but there was a good chunk of people that were working with young people that really saw them as broken in many ways, and in the language of the profession, very deficit focused. And that really wasn't what got me into the work. I got into the work for people like me and my friends in my neighborhood, and people gave me a chance, and people looked out for me, and they poured into me. They wanted to invest in seeing me be the best version of myself. And that was what got me into the profession. And so that's where I started looking at the positive youth development framework. That became something, it was new at the time. They didn't really know how to measure it well, but there was a lot of evidence like that's the energy we need to be moving forward. And so I got really into that. So in doing my doctoral work in public health, that's what I wanted to look at more closely, thinking about, when people are designing programs, what is the emphasis? What is the goal? What is the endpoint? What do they see as success? How do they want to measure success? And so I was looking at, is it the program? Is it the individuals that work in the program? That was a big part of what I was looking at. And in that effort to kind of wrap this piece up, two of the programs that I was looking at, it wasn't 100% intentional, but two of the programs were heavily grounded in hip hop culture. So one was a more traditional kind of youth development program, and another was a youth organizing program, but there was heavily infused with hip hop. So in, doing campaigns and, so at that time, I was like, wow, like people are really using hip hop in programming, whereas before it was kind of just like, oh, by the way, and I wasn't aware that people were that intentional in using hip hop within programming. So at the same time, I was like, well, let me look at are people researching this? And that's where I ran across the work of Dr. Edgar Tyson. And I'm like, oh, wow, like he's looking at this. And so that was what sort of gave me permission to sort of bring those worlds together. How do we think about how we invest in young people? And then how do we think about the most empowering ways of integrating hip hop culture in the ways that we invest in young people? And so, once I sort of had permission to do that, that's where I was like, well, people are looking at this way and looking at that way. It tended to fall into two camps, right? So either people were looking at all of the negative influences of hip hop, like and hip hop was lumped together with like rock music at the time, heavy metal rock.
Yeah.
And so it was either like, what are the ways that hip hop is really negative and having negative impacts on young people, or it was the complete opposite, right? So what are all the positive ways? And so my question was, is it possible that there are things that are helpful and things that may be risky or harmful? And that's an empirical question, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we ask a bunch of people in the ways that they engage, what are we going to find? And so that was kind of my entryway into the research aspect of it, kind of moving beyond just the practitioner side of things. And that really was the foundation. So in addition to finding out that, yeah, there are, like, for the same person, they can engage music that's important to them in helpful or empowering ways and risky ways. And the same you were talking earlier, right? So you use DMX in ways that were helpful and maybe some ways that aren't, right? So that was a finding. And then the second part was finding that when we ask people, like, what is it that is empowering, it kind of fell into five areas, five dimensions of things that are empowering, and they all revolved around getting better in some way. So one is esteem or feeling better. The second is resilience or doing better, right? So whatever obstacles or challenges, whatever's a part of your life story, how did you kind of cope and make it through? And then the third is growth or being better, right? So it's not just about getting by and coping and surviving, but it's about being the best version of yourself, right? And then there's community or better belonging, right? Thinking about those groups and communities that you identify with and feel a part of. And then the last is social change, right? So better conditions for those communities that you care about. So that's the public enemy, the messages and things like that. I identify as a Black person, I recognize the challenges, and I want things to be better, right? So those types of messages. And that really is the foundation of kind of, so the next step was like, okay, well, now that we kind of understand some of these things, what are some different ways that we might try to actually use what we know in working with young people, whether it's formal therapeutic or whether it's prevention, promoting self-care. So there's a whole spectrum of ways that we can really use all of the great aspects of the culture that, that slide that you had up earlier. There's so many different ways that you can take it,
Awesome.
I love this framing. I really do. And I think you've segued so well into some of the questions that we want to ask. And this time we're going to be pulling questions from the audience as well and integrating them as we talk. I think that as you're starting to lay this foundation about the ways that we can integrate and how the 5 things that you found, like, people are responding to, can you talk about the ways that this as a therapeutic intervention can be helpful in reaching people, whereas the traditional ways that we are typically trained in clinically as social workers, psychologists, behavioral health analysts, all these things, what's the difference? How can hip hop be used therapeutically in a way that is complementary, or perhaps not, to how we're currently taught and educated as mental health practitioners?
There are so many different ways, but I think, one of the things that I really appreciate is that there are active ways. There are so many different ways that you can express yourself. I think one of the challenges often is that things are so focused on articulate how you feel about a certain thing. And there's so much sort of pressure on being able to sort of think about and then have the words to capture what's going on for you. So I'll give you an example. So one of the ways that I found that is easier to help people, but even that was limiting. So I'm very big into lyrics, right? The ability for lyrics to both capture people's lived experiences. Like, that's one of the great things about artists, right? They're so lyrically gifted and able to capture complex, dynamic things in such concise but powerful ways, right? So that is in and of itself is a tool, right? So we're able to, with working with people, it's often easier for them to reflect on something that's external to them, that's not immediately personal to them, but it's reflective of them. But they can talk about something that's in a song quicker than they can generate that. But it's a doorway into being able. So I found like that's an example, a sort of scaffolded approach to getting to people's thoughts and feelings, right? So that's already a benefit. However, even that can be confronting, right? In terms of, if I'm working with you, we still even have to get to a level of trust before we can even get to that scaffolded approach, right? And so, in doing this work, a part of, so where lyrical analysis as a prompt, as a tool is where my sort of comfort zone and passion is behind it, I still had to know the broader universe of how people are using the culture. And so I partnered up with so Dr. Elliot Gann. He does therapeutic beat making. And so we did some collaborative things. And one of the things that was immediately apparent to me through the work is how engaging beat making is, how engaging the technology is. That's, you can put some technology down in and people will gravitate to it immediately. And it's an easy on-ramp. Like, the learning curve can be very easy. So one of the things that, after doing some collaborative stuff for a little while, I was like, that would be an even easier way to have a first level of engagement, right? So if we do something quick with the technology, we're building rapport very quickly over, and again, something external. It's not too confronting, right? And it's a quick win because you can produce something that you like very quickly. And so I started adding that as a first layer and then moving into that scaffolded piece, right? So we have, this is all hip hop based stuff, right? And so there's so many, and that's just a little tiny sliver, right? So if we want to get on the creative side, it oftentimes is easier to maybe write something down also than articulate something, right? So we can sort of slowly get to the personalization of whatever issue that we were talking about, but we have options of how we want to explore it. So maybe we want to write it down. Maybe we want to create something musical that is reflective of that. There's so many pieces. The other part too is validation of people's lived experience and their reality. Is a lot of times, through, whether it's through reflecting on something that exists in other music, or it's giving permission to express the reality of people's lived experience. So that's the other part. Like, there's an assumption within hip hop integrated work that the social resources and opportunities are not distributed equally. And a lot of people are coping with challenges and traumas that are a result of their social environment. And there is a permission, a freedom to really either lean into content that captures that, or give people the space to express that, which is very, very important. There's just so many pieces to it, so many pieces.
Well, we do have a couple questions. I think that's what you were thinking about, Dr. Claire. I'm trying to check.
But I think this also, I mean, if you could pull up Mark's question, because I think this
Absolutely.
connects well.
Shout out to Mark as well. But
thank you, Mark.
How hip hop therapy might benefit young folks who neither connect with artists nor listen to the music.
That's a great point. And you know, so there are a couple of pieces to that. So even the name hip hop therapy, I tried not to use hip hop therapy. So, well, first, shout out to Dr. Edgar Tyson, who coined the term hip hop therapy. But it really is, I call it hip hop and empowerment. But really, if you're not into hip hop, that's okay. It's the culture, the different aspects of the culture are used as a lens to your own personal growth and development, right? So it's a window into that. The other part too is we're talking about the active side of things, in the creative side of things. You create what you want, how you want, right? So words are words, whether you say them, whether you rap them, but they're your words. In terms of if you want to do beat making, that's the beauty of music technology, is that you can go in any sonic direction that you want. The tools are available to you, which is an exciting aspect. So you can move in any direction that you want. Now, the first layer of analysis that I turn to is through hip hop culture, because of, I think, the benefits. We talked about those dimensions earlier. Those dimensions of empowerment and development are so clear. There's also a density of language and use of figurative language, very descriptive. And so there are so many examples that can be that first doorway. But that doesn't mean that you have to stay in that space. And if a person says like that, you know, that's not really my thing. Well, what is your thing? Well, let's pull that up. Let's use that. You know, research is clear that the content that connects the most with people is what they're most interested in. So it makes sense to go in the direction of the energy. We did a workshop. We're working with young person, and their favorite group was Green Day. So we centered everything around that, and that's perfectly fine. And they're dope anyway. So you got some hip hop type drums in there, you know, that we can mess with. So, but it's a great question. You don't necessarily need to, and that's a big part of this, right? So we're talking about developmental narratives that are applicable to everyone. That's universal, right? Everyone wants to feel better. Everyone wants to do better. Everyone wants to be better. Everyone wants to belong, and everyone wants the conditions that they're in to be a little bit better, right? No matter where you are. You could be in Bangladesh, you could be in Cape Town, you can be in Compton. It doesn't matter, right? And that's a big part of what makes hip hop so powerful. Everyone knows what it's like to be beaten down in some way and try to pick themselves back up. Everyone knows what it's like to not feel the greatest about themselves. Everyone knows what it's like to want to be doing a little bit better. Even if they haven't made the best decisions in the world, you know, they want to turn over a new leaf, right? These are things that are part of the the human experience, and that's what we're trying to get to with young people.
Yeah,
is that once we get that opens the door to all sorts of, okay, well, how do we get you from here to there, right? Mm-hmm. So in many ways, it's a doorway. It's just such a powerful, rich doorway that we have available to us.
Thank you. And I love that you expanded it beyond what people, again, think of hip hop, right? Where think of hip hop as just that one element, and it's not. It is so broad. It's universal. And so when we think about our shared identity, I know that the arts is something that you research, right? And the integration of arts into our mental health, our physical health, our social well-being. And so what we're talking about here is beyond what we may think of rap or the lyrics or the beats or anything else or the dancing. Art is the universal language. You can see an art piece in Kenya and you can be from a whole other country. You could be from China and it's like it moves you. You can hear a piece of music from Pakistan and you're just moved. You don't even understand what people are, you may not understand what people are saying, but we have so much research that also tells us that universally, regardless of language, people are singing about heartbreak. They're singing about struggles that they're having. They're talking about love. I love country music. I've loved it since I was a kid. I'm from the islands. Line dancing is really big in Barbados. So I grew up listening to country music. I can tell all my heart belting in songs I was a child, didn't even know what it was, right? All of us probably have heard Adele over our lifespan. We've had heartbreak. Adele is the heartbreak queen. We are just like, oh my gosh, yes, let it burn, right? And so ultimately, it doesn't matter. The conversation is deeper than connecting with someone through, well, again, the assumption that hip hop is just rap. This is about connecting with someone's soul. This is about connecting with their heart. This is about truly connecting. And I love that you talked about rapport building, because clinically we are told about this rapport building, but we have these very prescriptive approaches that do not align with that, right? And those are a lot of times dictated by the way that we're educated, the way that we're practicing, the regulations that we have under us, insurance companies that tell us you have to, by the third session, have a diagnosis. How, right? And so what are some of the ways that you think that therapists can actually integrate these elements into their clinical practice beyond some of the things that you shared? And what specific elements of hip hop do you believe can be really helpful for people in addressing some of those deeper mental health needs that they have?
Well, I think that I'll start with that last part. I think, in that, in my sort of domain of resilience, that's where a lot of esteem and resilience, that's where a lot of the deeper stuff lies. And I think hip hop culture it does harken back to kind of what I've discussed already, but hip hop is very rich on very difficult topics. And, we started off the conversation with DMX. I mean, even if we just stay there, simply the topic of, abuse, a very heavy issue that isn't always discussed, or the impacts of that aren't always discussed. Loss, death, there's a lot of conversation about community violence. Parental dynamics, absent parents, parents being incarcerated, substance use, having parents that are addicted, suicide, suicidal ideation. These are the hallmarks of trauma. And, again, back to our early conversations, like, so hell, tell me about, X. That's not, how do you get there? You know what I mean? Like, and so we have the opportunity to sort of slowly work our way there from a lyrical standpoint. But the other part too is kind of going back to engaging some of the more expressive elements, using music technology. Using technology can be very regulating, whether it is, we talked about beat making before. A couple of areas that I explore is making mixtapes. So like therapeutic mixtape making. I tell the story a lot about, one of the people that we worked with that was, presented as extremely anxious, right? The type of person that, if they're sitting, they can't really sit still. they're kind of ripping up little pieces of paper, kind of fiddling with stuff, like just very, very anxious. And introduce them to using the software to make their own mixtape. And what that involves is identifying songs that are meaningful to you, and you can tailor that to however you want, right? So we'll just use the generic meaningful to you in some way. So if a person selects 10 or 15 songs, and teach them how to use the software to decide what's the sequence of the song is going to be. What are your favorite parts of the songs? You don't have to use the whole song. You can use a little snippet. Are there other things, other types of media, sounds, commercials, whatever, things that you want to integrate? So basically it's creating a tapestry, a mixtape, right? But using the software allows you to focus. All of the things involved in, like, well, why would this song go before that? Well, it kind of leads into that. All this stuff is meaningful to you in some way. Oftentimes there's a deeper meaning than sort of the surface piece. These are all therapeutic experiences, music experiences, but it's also regulating, right? Helps them to focus, to really be mindful about these actions. And I remember that person, after they had that experience, they were like, this was so relaxing, right? And that's not the first thing you would think of in terms of, like, what is the goal of this? The goal is, for us to be able to kind of talk about these, why was this here and that there? But there are a lot of these musical experiences that are either regulating or allow you to get into flow, that conversation. I talk about DJing. People haven't written about this, but I talk about DJing. If you take a song that you really, really like, right? You put one on each deck, right? But that's meaningful to you in some way, right? You identify with certain lines, a certain part, not just the sort of musical aesthetics of it, but I'm talking about sort of the lyrical depth of it. And if you just think about, just mix that song. So say it's a 3-minute, 4-minute song. Just mix that song, right? Scratching parts that you like or certain lines that you like. You can mix that song for 20 minutes, right? Just that song, going from the different parts that are, put effects on it, but it's meaningful to, so you're in that song. You know what I mean? And so that's another, what I argue is a type of meditation. It's a type of mindfulness. It's a type of, something that grounds you, allows you, if you're out of regulation, to regulate yourself. So there are a lot of these things that we can use as tools, both on the active side and on the receptive side, that I think are really important.
Well, I got one more question I want to highlight from Dr. Heliana Ramirez. She wants to make sure she can find out where she can learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. So the easiest way, if you look in Google Scholar and just type in Raphael Travis, it'll list like all of my articles and stuff that I've written. Some of them you can access without a paywall. If you run into a paywall, just email me, rtravis@txstate.edu, and I'll be glad to email you the article. The Healing Power of Hip Hop, it's the book that was out, and that's given more of a context to all of this, in particular of why it's relevant in general, but why it's particularly relevant within the Black community, thinking about our sort of social history. There's a newer book. I have I'm a co-editor on it, but there is a chapter in there that's important. That's some of the more recent findings of a study we did that was done. And it's an area that I've been talking a lot more about, is the use of, we're talking about it in working with the professional here, but in terms of self-care, right? How can we use what we know to help support people in their own self-care and being intentional around the types of music experiences that they generate for themselves, right? Like, how do I listen? How do I curate? How do I make playlists? How do I, get on the turntables? How do I make, but the idea is that, and I think this is part of that introduction from the beginning, like, we're using something in a professional capacity that is an organic culture of healing that the community already had. It came from the community, right? So we don't necessarily have any specialized knowledge. We're just trying to create a language and structure that more people can experience this organic healing culture.
Loving it. I really appreciate that you also brought in tech, because that was so you answered a question before, because I was going to ask you what is the role of technology in this, but you started talking about that, right? And we're both social workers. And there is no way that Dr. Claire, who is the unapologetic humanist and intersectional mental health practitioner and social and racial justice advocate, is not going to talk about and name the things we need to name. Social work is a profession, and I am proud to be a social worker, and also sometimes frustrated in our profession, because I think that when I look at the broad scope of social work, most of the practitioners that I have found actually who are doing this work in terms of hip hop and integration are all social workers, right? You mentioned Dr. Tyson, who's like, yeah, social work, right? I know of someone, Dr. S, who I believe is based on the East Coast, social worker. A lot of the people are in this space. Social work inherently has a racial and social justice mandate. A lot of times people ask me, what's the difference between social workers and psychologists and behavioral health analysts and all the things? And I'm like, we're trained differently, and there's a lot of overlaps, all amazing practitioners and professions who are absolutely integrated. But two things I want to pull out: social workers are among the most prevalent mental health providers in this country. Social workers also have a professional mandate, which I can't speak for everyone, but I'm not aware of any other profession that has a social justice mandate built into their professional code. So what do you think social work's role is in expanding this and challenging some of the current practices that may be limiting the integration of this culturally responsive, culturally humble, and culturally honoring practice into our mental health services?
I really believe that we can be in the driver's seat for pushing it forward. I wrote an article a little bit back, really sort of challenging the field. And the title of it is All Awareness and No Action. It was meant to be deliberately provocative, but for that reason, right? It is a part of our code of ethics. And there are other professions that have social justice as a part of their code of ethics. But I think also within our accreditation mandate of what we have to teach, I think is a little bit more explicit, right? We have to prepare students that graduate that can show that they have skill in understanding these things and putting them into practice across different levels, right? That's the other advantage of social work, right? So it's at that macro direct service level, but it's also at that system policy and advocacy level as well, in the organizational systems level. And so that is unique. And you're 100% right. Like there's no negotiating that. That's a mandatory aspect of the profession. So I think we have all of the things in place to do so, but there are so many obstacles and roadblocks in being able to at least bringing arts into that conversation within the educational and practice system, because there aren't many people doing that work. So there aren't many people that can supervise them around that work. There aren't many classes, so it's difficult to learn about how to do that within schools. Like, we're fortunate enough, we have a class, but it's only an elective. It's not a mandate. So people have to opt in to take that class. Funders, it's hit and miss whether they want to fund research to give more evidence so that people see that it is valuable to do. When you get at national conferences, the people that select what research will be talked about at that. You don't have many people there that can say, oh, this is compelling research that needs to be featured at this conference. People that are reviewing manuscripts at journals where things are going to get published, it's hit or miss, right? So I get a ton of the articles that people are putting out to review because there aren't other people to review, right? So there's all of these roadblocks which would be natural ways to feed the pipeline to promote arts-based, social justice grounded work that's out there. But the opportunity is there. It definitely, the landscape is better than it was, almost 20 years ago when I was getting into the field. We have platforms like this where people are having these conversations, and from the students that they want to do it. So I believe the future is bright. Now, we talked before this meeting, there are certain places where it, may be a little bit less friendly to do this work, based on kind of the kind of climate that we're in now. But the opportunity is there, the evidence is there, and yeah, it's not. The good thing now is that there is evidence. There are people that are doing this work. There are artists that recognize that this is an area that they can participate in. A lot of creative artists didn't know, and the hip hop and education, hip hop ed, and that broader movement is really helpful because there is a lot of overlap between using hip hop in education and using hip hop therapeutically. There are concentric circles, and they're a lot further along than social work is with this work. And so we benefit from a little bit of the wake of their work, the energy of their work we can benefit from. And there's a lot of clout. I do a lot of work with people in that movement. So I think there's a lot of room, and I'm hoping we can lead the charge, honestly.
I think we need to. I mean, this is a call to action for social workers and social worker allies. Our Code of Ethics says that we are advocates. We also have a Section 6 of our Code of Ethics speaks specifically to political engagement. So public health is hip hop is public health, and it is political, right? There's no way that we can address the breadth of challenges and issues happening in our society if we do not have approaches that integrate the voice of the society. And too often, the way that we are trained and educated is so based on Eurocentric values and belief systems that it negates the global majority. It negates the lived experiences. I look at this as an autoethnographic approach in the way that we are training and teaching the things that you're doing. And we know that has efficacy, right? That's qualitative research, right? Hip hop is an ongoing 50 plus years of qualitative research that is based also on quantitative facts that's happening, right? Because hip hop has been used to talk about social injustices from the foundation. And we know that social injustice and systemic racism and all these things are directly connected to people's well-being. There's a reason why we see people who are living in certain communities with redlining and poor school funding and all those who also have higher rates of incarceration, poor school completion rates, more hospitalizations, substance misuse, because stress is not meant to be something that we live in all day, every day. A little bit of stress for a short space of time we could handle. Long-term stress over generation. And so we're talking about interrupting these cycles and patterns in our society that are disruptive and using elements that we have readily available to us, regardless of whether or not you subscribe to hip hop, because I hope that things that some of you take away from this is applicable across the board, right? I can think of LaBianca, the Afrobeats artist who came out with that song People last year, right? That's talking about substance abuse. It's talking about depression. And we've also seen that research is telling us that in the last 20, 25 years, there's been an exponential increase in hip hop artists talking about anxiety and depression and substance use in their music. And people are buying this, and people are listening to it, and people are responding to it. So if we have a way to address the heart and the soul of people, we also have an obligation as a profession, as behavioral health professions, to advocate that the people that are ensuring, the people that are literally gatekeeping whether or not we can do this and how we can do this, understand that this is not something that is optional for us, that this is a requirement. Because I can think in my own therapeutic practices, sometimes it wasn't about, let's talk about this, right? I was able to connect with kids over games. I would sometimes say to them, can you bring me a song that you like? Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, I don't like all the curses, but I'm like, all right, I'm gonna deal with it. But it's also how I found out some of my kids were being abused, right? It's also how I found out that some of my kids may have had some severe body image issues and eating disorders, right? Because no one was talking to them about it, especially when I look through culturally, where I think, oh, we don't assume this about boys, right? Because there's a toxic masculinity that is being pushed in our society, regardless of what color your skin is or what religion you have. And these are ways that we can connect with people and help them connect with their shared humanity and identity. So we are going to be wrapping up, and we're going to take a few questions again from the audience and some comments. But I wanted to, let's be honest, are there some challenges that you see that might arise with hip hop as a therapeutic approach? Because we want to prevent a balanced conversation, right? Are there challenges that you see with this approach?
100%. I think, one of the biggest challenges is people that see it as a new shiny toy to use as a therapeutic tool without taking the time to investigate the culture and have a healthy respect for, what is the objective of using hip hop in a therapeutic capacity. You touched on something that's really important is, it being culturally responsive, but not in like a token kind of way. We know that a lot of people in general don't engage in therapy or start, but don't come back because they feel that disconnect. They feel like this person doesn't respect me, respect what I'm about. And this is an opportunity to potentially connect and have a better understanding of people's lived experiences in a respectful and healthy way. But one of the challenges is if people are only using it because they think it's the latest cool thing to do, and don't really have a healthy respect for the culture. And the biggest, I think, challenge is there's still an enormous stigma and stereotype and assumption about what you're doing. If I say I'm a therapist and I specialize in therapeutic uses of hip hop culture, if that's all I say, and I ask 10 people, I've told you what I do, and I ask 10 people, what do you think I do? I'm going to get stuff all over the map, right? Some people are going to think I'm in there dancing. Some people are going to think, I'm just wiggy, wiggy. That's the sound that they're going to make. That's not, you know what I mean? Like, you know what I'm saying? Or they'll start beatboxing. You know what I mean? Like, so there isn't even among people that do the work, I don't even know you know what I'm saying? Like there's a lot of gray area. And so it takes a lot to really articulate both what is done, why it's done, and the potential desirable outcomes of what is done. And, and that goes back to all the things that we talked about earlier. Where are these roadblocks that exist? If we had consistent courses, then we'd have an idea. Oh yeah, most therapeutic hip hop courses cover X, Y, and Z, right? If we had a consistent funding source, we would, even if it was just one, we would know like these are the types of projects, therapeutic projects that have been funded in the past, have been shown to be successful. We could sort of develop some sort of heuristic around like what we're doing. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges. I know we talked offline about like certification versus not certification. There's pros and cons. The pros is that, like any profession, we know that anybody that says they do this work, we know that they do this, this, and this, right? But then it obviously opens up a can of worms. Like, okay, well, who's going to be the person that decides what people need to do and who's going to, so I think that's a big challenge as well for what we do. So, yeah.
Thank you. I'm passing it back to you.
Awesome. I'm just really excited, and a lot of this kind of mirrors my experience in hip hop education. A lot of people don't get it, and on the same side, they get art education, and I guess on the other side they get art therapy. But I was flabbergasted when I walked into the SF Department of Public Health on how resonant, my little intro 101 class was to these folks who look like us too. You know what I'm saying? So where there's a demand, we need that supply. And for me, my biggest job has been getting hip hop artists paid, doing whatever I can get them to do, because whenever these young kids get in front of these hip hop artists, they see themselves. They see something that they can aspire to be. And one thing I've always said is hip hop is a culture rooted in self-affirmation. Doesn't matter what you're affirming, but you'll get there. You know what I'm saying? So how does that sit with you? That's the last question I want to ask you. How does that sit with you? The hip hop is a culture of affirmation.
Yeah, I think in terms of a starting point, at least on the therapy, it resonates with me on the side of us. I believe that the starting point for therapeutic engagement is helping people to affirm who they are and feel comfortable with who they are. So we always start with that esteem. And, a common question is, tell me why you are awesome. And that is so confronting for a lot of people. Like, they have a hard time just there. And, that's a big part of, from the jump. I always want people like, I'm glad you're here. I'm excited to see you. You're important. I want to hear what you have to say, right? It's like, we have to help pour into them, but that's what we're building. We're building that scaffolding for them to affirm who they are, their place in the world, how they want to show up, and the spaces that they want to be a part of, right? You have some agency about that. And I think it also opens the door to the risky side of things. We didn't really get into that as much, but I believe that is, we have to always couple those together, right? Because the risk of affirming yourself and building yourself up is it being at the expense of someone else, right? Or having to step on somebody else for you to get your leg up, that by any means necessary. And that's a core part of my approach to therapeutic work, right? So it's similar to that conversation about, internal versus external validation, right? So are we creating opportunities for people to build themselves up with internal validation without it needing to be the money you have, the cards you have, the relationships, whatever, right? Because once those things go away, what's left, right? So that statement of hip hop being a culture of affirmation, that means that resonates a lot with me.
Awesome. Well, I think we got like 1 minute, so I just want to say thank you, Dr. Raphael Travis, for hollering and just being so willing to get down and talk with us about this. Can you just give people just one other way where they can reach out to you, where they can get information, get to your books, just your shout out time?
Yeah, absolutely. So the easiest way is I'm on social media at RapT Jr. So at RAPTJR. That's the easiest way to connect with me, whether it's Instagram or any of the social spaces. You can also email me at raptjr@gmail.com. I see scrolling on the bottom of the screen. That's here at Texas State, rtravis@txstate.edu. If you're interested, there's also a link tree with everything on there. I have a website, flowstory.org. You can, if you're interested in the research, Google Scholar. If you look up Google Scholar and then type my name in, Raphael Travis, that will list all the research that I've done. If you can't access an article, please email me and I'll be glad to get back to you. If you ever want a training or a workshop, please holler at me as well. Glad to come out and talk to individual therapists, practitioners, your team, and talk about this work and really go in depth with some of the tools and things that you can do. But yeah.
Whoa, I cut off your holler. I apologize.
All good.
Yo, thank you very much. I appreciate you.
This was so awesome. And I'm so honored again to share space and to be able to highlight this work, because I think what was so important for us was to show people that there are people like you, Dr. Travis, that exist, that truly have a heart for this and are taking a social justice approach to expanding the way that we think of healing and using culturally affirming practices. So I thank you for being the definition of social work, for being inspirational, and for the countless lives that you are changing every single day by leading in this space. It's empowering and it's incredibly powerful. And as I shared with you when we met offline, for us, this was a real treat because so much of your work is integrated into Hip Hop Therapy 101. And so it's like, oh my gosh, it's a celebrity thing. So it's really awesome. Please join us next week, because next week for our final, we are connecting the larger dots. We have gone from hip hop healing and hip hop is therapy. Now we're going to hip hop is public health with my sister from another Mr. Carol Kim, who I'm so excited to have join us next week. She is phenomenal. She's a huge hip hop fan. She is a public health genius guru, and she is such a beautiful human being. And so we are really excited to wrap this. This is Mental Health Awareness Month, and we are doing this to make sure that every single human being has the opportunity to thrive and live their best life.
Awesome. All right, peace, y'all. See y'all next week.
Thank you for the invite. Peace, y'all.
Thank you.